The man never expected that as the strongest hero who defeated the evil dragon 200 years ago, he now couldn't even form a decent party. This was simply because, as a healing mage, he could only use basic magic. As a result, he was expelled from his original party and became known throughout the Labyrinth City as an incompetent. Even though the receptionist earnestly tried to persuade him, but Blue Hair insisted on teaming up with the male lead. He had no choice but to agree to their team request. He also warned the male lead that Blue Hair was a newbie. Initially, they could only go to the western grasslands to level up. However, the male lead didn't intend to go to such a boring place. Because the maze's magic leaks out, there are several monster bases around Matata. In the forest in the north and the wetland in the south, there are many powerful monsters, but only the western plains have minor creatures like slimes and goblins, and their numbers are so few that you barely encounter them. In contrast, if they go into the dungeon, they'll run into monsters just by wandering around. As long as Blue Hair don't go too deep, it won't be dangerous. Of course, if she encounters an emergency, the male lead will still step in to help when necessary. With that, the two of them arrived at the nearest labyrinth. Blue-haired girl took the initiative to volunteer as the vanguard. After all, her class is a martial artist. They couldn't let the male lead, being a healer, take the front line. This caught the male lead a bit off guard. After all, in his previous parties, he was always the one asked to lead and scout ahead. The two quickly arrived at the first level of the labyrinth. The male protagonist was a bit worried. This kid just became an adventurer. Can they really fight well? The blue-haired one immediately proved herself upon seeing this. She threw a punch straight away, and instantly defeated the 5 goblins they encountered one by one. This surprised the male protagonist. He didn't expect her to be so skilled. After the goblins died, they dropped quite a few magic stones. The male lead collected them. With this much, it should be enough to cover tonight's lodging. But Blue Hair still seemed full of energy, so she asked if they should go deeper. Blue Hair said no problem. If there's an emergency, she'll protect the male lead. They intended to continue exploring the upper levels for a while. But unexpectedly, they encountered a half-orc. This is a monster that appears in the middle levels. Defeating it might be a bit difficult, but if 2 people work together, the success rate is still quite high. Blue-haired girl raises both hands in agreement. She has been wanting to challenge herself for a long time. So she jumped straight down to draw the beastman's aggression. She thought she could rely on her speed advantage. Then, she kicked the half-orc's head with one blow. But unexpectedly, the half-orc's defense was ridiculously high. The blue-haired one's attack was completely ineffective. Instead, the half-orc forced her into a corner with one blow. In this situation, there was no way to dodge. The blue-haired one thought she was dead. But unexpectedly, the half-orc who had rendered her helpless was instantly killed by the male lead, the healer, with one sword strike. This made Blue Hair feel strange. Are you really a healing mage? Just now, when entering the dungeon, the male lead not only disarmed various traps, but now he has also instantly killed a mid-tier monster. The protagonist explained that since he's been in this profession for a long time, he's learned a bit of every skill. As he said this, he cast a healing spell, healing the injuries Blue Hair had just sustained. Afterward, the two collected the magic stones dropped by the orcs. The protagonist suggested that today's haul was decent. He proposed returning to the guild for now. But the blue-haired girl said she was still full of energy and ready to keep fighting. The protagonist could only agree. They then spent another 2 hours grinding in the upper levels of the dungeon. By the time they returned to the guild, the receptionist was shocked. You defeated so many monsters. And those magic stones in the middle, they're clearly Orcish. You actually took a newbie to the middle level of the maze? The male protagonist explains that the orcs suddenly appeared on the upper level. The receptionist thinks for a moment. They've received many such reports recently. It seems there's really a problem within the maze. Then she exchanges the magic stones the male protagonist collected for cash. Looking at the huge pile of cash, the male lead was shocked to find there was so much. In his previous team, he always only received about 1/10. It seems he was definitely cheated. The blue-haired one suggested the male lead apply to recover his money, but the male lead said he didn't care about the past. Besides, he now has new teammates. Making some living expenses will be a breeze. It was already evening. The two of them found an inn to stay in. Blue Hair remembered past events. Back then, she was attacked by a monster. The one who saved her was the male protagonist. So from that moment on, she made a firm decision. When she grew up, she would become an adventurer and form a team with him. But unexpectedly, he hadn't recognized her the entire day. But on second thought, she has grown taller. Her clothes are different now, and most importantly, her hair has turned blue. It's normal that he wouldn't recognize her. However, one thing struck Blue Hair as odd. The protagonist is ridiculously strong, so why does everyone here call him incompetent? The protagonist never expected this. The blonde captain, during the subjugation of the Hydra, abandoned his companions and fled. This was because the male lead, despite being a healer, couldn't cast anti-venom magic, leaving the rogue in the party unable to fight. However, the male lead had already warned them to prepare antidotes beforehand. The blonde captain was stingy and unwilling to spend money, yet he blamed the male lead for being useless. Seeing that the mage's magic was also ineffective against the Hydra, the blonde captain did not hesitate to leave everyone behind and run away. Then the mage also retreated. The male protagonist takes the risk and leaves with his poisoned teammates. Afterwards, the other party returned the favor with revenge. The blonde captain lets the male protagonist take the blame, so let him get out of his team. Women are also ungrateful. Then the blame is all because the male protagonist is too incompetent and they can't defeat Hydra. Getting kicked out serves them right. This is absolutely explosive. The male lead is speechless. Clearly, it was those two enjoying themselves until morning. That's why their poor condition caused the mission to fail. Both of them are so shameless. Neither admits it's their fault. So they make the mage Amaya decide who's to blame. Amaya is afraid she'll get kicked out of the team too. Forced by the pressure from the two, he could only point to the male lead. In the middle of the night, the male lead awoke from his sleep. He recalled a similar incident 6 years ago. Back then, his reputation as a useless person was already quite famous. Yet, a team still extended an invitation to him. But he didn't expect that everyone in the team was a villain. From the beginning, they only wanted him to be a living bait to attract the monsters. But the male lead was incredibly lucky. The monsters still found the trash teammates. He watched them die at the monsters' hands. He himself, miraculously, left the maze unharmed. The male protagonist, who had already despaired of being an adventurer, unexpectedly encountered a child being attacked by goblins. Without hesitation, he charged forward to fight the goblins. But he was still knocked unconscious by a goblin. When he woke up again, it was night. The goblins had been eliminated by the knights who arrived. The male lead felt ashamed. He hadn't been the one to save her. Ultimately, he was just incompetent. Unexpectedly, the girl thanked him. She said it was thanks to his hard fighting that she was able to hold out until the knights arrived. So she said he was very cool just now. The male lead noticed the girl's injured arm. He quickly helped her heal. But that was all he could do. After telling the girl about his ordeal, the girl was furious. How could they use a living person as bait? Because of this, the girl decided to become an adventurer when she grew up. Then she could team up with him and protect him. Although he knew she was a noble's daughter and could never become an adventurer. Yet, her words gave him the courage to continue being an adventurer. Later, he met his master and kept training. Although his skills as a healer didn't improve, he learned many essential skills for being an adventurer, until he was invited to join a team by the blonde. He just didn't expect to take the blame so soon for a few dishes. But the protagonist is still very grateful to that girl. Otherwise, he wouldn't have met his current teammate, Senna. Today, the male protagonist plans to take Senna on a deeper adventure. It's Senna's first time seeing a teleportation circle in the labyrinth. She thought it could teleport to any desired location. Little did she know, a teleportation circle also needs an exit, so it can only teleport to places with other teleportation circles. Nowadays, the technology for teleportation circles has been lost. No one knows how to set up new teleportation circles anymore. This time, the two have arrived in the mid-level labyrinth. Therefore, the monsters that appear will be even stronger. Seeing that Senna intended to confront the Lich head-on, the male lead quickly stopped her, telling her not to approach. This was because a Lich is a non-corporeal magical being. Physical attacks are ineffective against it. Therefore, it's a quite troublesome opponent for them, who cannot use magic attacks. The male lead suggested they retreat, but Senna was confident she could defeat it. So the protagonist drew the enemy's hatred to hold off the Lich. This created an opening for Senna to attack. Because humans can control the magical power of chakra in their bodies through training. Even martial artists can master it. Senna wrapped her fists in chakra, and with a single strike, she completely obliterated the Lich. However, Senna's arm suffered extensive injuries during the initial attack. The protagonist immediately uses healing on her. What he's holding is a magical tool that enhances healing effects. The magic stones collected by adventurers are retrieved by the guild and given to craftsmen. After being processed into magical tools, they are returned to the adventurers. Soon, Senna's injuries are completely healed. Senna excitedly remarks that such a large magic stone must be quite valuable. The receptionist beams with a smile, thinking it's another day of great commissions. The protagonist suggests they should have a nice meal today. Seeing the male lead wanting a drink, Senna followed suit and also wanted a drink. At this moment, Senna noticed a strange white building outside the town. She couldn't figure out what it was. The male lead had also asked the locals before. But strangely, even the craftsmen who built it didn't know what they were building. They didn't even know who the real client was. It is said that the design plans and expenses were provided by an agent. Moreover, the agent is backed by yet another agent, creating a nested hierarchy. This added a layer of mystery to the mastermind behind it all. Everyone saw this thing as seemingly harmless, so they let it go. They just assumed it was the work of some rich eccentric. However, the protagonist thought that rather than this thing, it would be better to build city walls. This city doesn't have any walls. It would be hard to defend against foreign invasion. Senna felt there was absolutely no need to worry. Because there are countless adventurers here. Whether it's monsters or thieves, it's everyone's game. Before they parted, Senna called out to the male lead, but she ultimately didn't reveal her identity, although she really wanted to share a room with him. Little did she know, the male lead was also reminiscing about the noble lady from 6 years ago. He wonders if there's still a chance to meet her again. However, the protagonist is unaware that he has already become someone's target. Upon learning that Senna teamed up with the protagonist, a shadowy figure orders their subordinates to drive the protagonist out of town by any means necessary. Meanwhile, on the other side, the blonde captain has already found a new healer to replace the protagonist. Little did this blonde expect, it turns out that the supposedly useless male protagonist, who was kicked out by him, was actually the backbone of the team. Ever since the male protagonist was driven away, the blonde guy immediately found a new healer, Layla, to replace him. Eagerly, they set out to fight the Hydra again, only to discover that the Hydra had turned into a seven-headed beast. This was because the heads cut off by the male protagonist hadn't grown back yet. The blonde guy insisted that Layla join him in the fight. This left the beautiful healer completely at a loss. She has never heard of a healer charging into battle, but the blonde thinks it's perfectly normal. The male lead did it before. Layla is speechless. This squad actually lets their healer participate in close-quarters combat. Little do they know, the male lead cut off all the Hydra's heads. Seeing Layla unwilling to fight, the blonde shrugs. As long as she can cast antidotal magic, it's fine. Meanwhile, the male lead and Senna are working another day as receptionists. The receptionist suggests the male lead increase his staff. Having a warrior or mage join the team not only makes things more convenient but also helps the three of them earn more money. However, the male lead still decides to maintain the status quo for now. With their current daily earnings, they can afford to rent their own place as a base. After all, there are too many pieces of equipment and items to store at an inn. The daily lodging fees are also a significant expense. Not to mention, with a man and woman teaming up, it's very likely to develop into a romantic relationship. By then, the base could turn into a love nest. Speaking of this, the male lead remembered that Blondie also rented a standalone villa before, but only he was assigned to sleep in the warehouse. Speaking of Blondie's team, the receptionist thought it might be a good thing for the male lead to be kicked out of the team, because Blondie still failed to defeat the injured Hydra on his second attempt. Now Blondie is completely at a loss. Even though their team leveled up, they still couldn't defeat the injured Hydra. Instead, they're even more reckless than before. Layla's right, that blonde guy isn't that strong. He just recklessly charges head-on. That's why the little mage was seriously injured. At this point, those two trash teammates finally realized that the male lead they kicked out might actually be useful. The male lead will obediently follow any instructions given. He didn't even realize they had cheated him out of his payment. That blonde guy is unbelievably arrogant. He thought that all he had to do was beckon to the male lead and he'd definitely come running back. After all, their team is very famous. Soon, the blonde guy shamelessly found the male lead and told him to gratefully return. Seeing that the male lead didn't answer directly, Blondie was putting on airs, and he get why he hesitated. After all, as a top-tier adventurer himself, it must be tough for the protagonist to keep up with him, but he doesn't need to worry about that. If real danger arises, he'll throw the protagonist out. Wait, no, he'll step up to protect him. The protagonist wanted to say that's not the issue. Blondie thought the earlier scam about the reward had been exposed. He guarantee they'll split the reward afterwards. He don't know why the calculation was wrong before. Then he turned around and belittled Layla, calling her incompetent. So he wanted the male lead to come back. The male lead only thanked him. That made the two scumbags ecstatic. Now, Senna finally stepped forward and powerfully defended her husband. The male lead will absolutely not return to the yellow-haired team. The blonde captain isn't worried at all. She should ask the male lead what he thinks. The male lead comforts Senna, telling her not to worry. He says his thanks were only because of the blonde captain's repeated invitation. Whether it's sincere or not doesn't matter, but he already has a new, important partner, so he won't go back. The blonde captain's mentality collapses. He forces all the things he did onto Senna. He accuses Senna of trying to take advantage of the protagonist. She must have realized that the protagonist isn't incompetent. On the contrary, he's a highly capable adventurer. Even the rewards weren't evenly distributed, with her taking 80%. Now the protagonist can no longer endure it. He doesn't resent what the team has done before. But if they dare to harm Senna, then they shouldn't blame him for cutting ties. Enraged, the blonde captain wanted to recruit new teammates, preferably warriors who could fight alongside him. He was determined to take down the Hydra, no matter what. Unexpectedly, a long-haired masked man in armor with 8-pack abs volunteered to join. The blonde captain observed for a moment, then drew his sword in public. Although embarrassed, the blonde captain agreed to let him join the team. The scorned woman worried about the man's hidden identity and suspected a deception. However, the blonde captain had more faith in his strength. After all, if they fail to conquer the Hydra again, the team's reputation will plummet. Shortly after Senna returned, she found the innkeeper's daughter at the male protagonist's door. She thought she was trying to get the jump on them. Little did she know, guests had arrived at the inn looking for the male protagonist, and they brought Senna along. It turned out that the young mage had something to ask of the male protagonist. She hoped he could help them. It's because the blonde captain plans to hunt the 9-headed Hydra again today. He even went out to recruit new teammates for it. Now the young mage clearly recognizes the protagonist's strength. If it weren't for the protagonist chopping off 2 heads the first time, they would have been completely wiped out on the spot. The protagonist denies it was all their imagination. However, Layla doesn't believe him. After all, the second time, they were in a desperate battle against the 7-headed Hydra. It's hard to imagine what would happen if we faced the Hydra. The young mage hopes to strike while the Hydra is still recovering. If the male lead were here, he could definitely defeat it. She hopes the male lead will return. Senna doesn't understand why she wants to save that scumbag, the blonde guy. The young mage admits the blonde guy is indeed a scumbag. His flaws are too numerous to list in 2.5 hours. But he's still a teammate. Senna is angry. Doesn't that mean the male lead is also a teammate? She couldn't have been unaware of how he was treated before. The mage explained she didn't want to. She worried that if she spoke up for the male lead, she might be the one kicked out of the team. After all, she's just a newbie. She's never even been in another adventurer's party. It's unclear whether even the blonde captain and the thief acted correctly. But now she knows the blonde captain was wrong. Regardless of his adventurer status, the blonde captain is a complete scoundrel. But after all, they're still partners on the same team. She couldn't just leave the blonde captain to die. Layla said the young mage had been wanting to apologize to the male lead. Even while unconscious, she kept saying, "I'm sorry." Therefore, she hoped deeply that the male lead would forgive her. The male lead comforted her, saying that everything in the past was over, but he still had no intention of returning. Senna whispered to Layla, consulting her, why not take the young mage and leave the team? But the young mage was bound by the team's ties and unwilling to leave. After all, deep down, she was still a kind and good child. The male lead recalled the blonde man's belittling of Layla. Reminding her to stay would surely bring back unpleasant memories, but she couldn't leave the young mage behind and depart on her own. Unexpectedly, upon returning, she saw an old acquaintance, Jik. Jik thought that by wearing a mask, Layla wouldn't recognize him. Layla was speechless. He wanted to keep acting, so let him. But in her heart, she felt warm and happy. This blonde-haired man never imagined that one day he would be saved by the very waste he'd kicked out of the team. In order to save Senna, who was taken hostage by the monsters, the dormant power within the protagonist finally awakened. Since teaming up with the protagonist, Senna has been going to the dungeon with him every day to earn gold. The protagonist suddenly brought up the Hydra living in the wetlands. It's a ferocious and highly venomous magical beast. Its entire body is covered in powerful muscles and tough scales. She could deflect those inferior physical and magical attacks. Senna couldn't help but worry about the young mage. But while Hydra aren't everywhere, they're still the most common in high-difficulty monster hunts. Therefore, people have long since developed methods to deal with them. Because their venom is so terrifying, a targeted antidote has now been developed. And you can buy it here with money. It just costs a lot of money, so the stingy blonde captain can't bring himself to spend it. He can only pin his hopes on Layla's interpretation magic. But the male lead still thinks highly of the blonde captain. Don't let his despicable character fool you. His swordsmanship is actually quite good. As long as he doesn't become a womanizer, he's a formidable swordsman. The same goes for the thief. Speed and agility are both top-notch. Although Hydra has a wide field of vision, as long as Blondie doesn't cause too much trouble with his abilities, he should be able to quietly approach Hydra from behind. Senna is jealous of how highly the male lead praises his former teammate. She's grown tired of challenging one maze a day. So today, she also wants to check out the wetlands. At this moment, Blondie's team is already fighting Hydra. The masked man struck one of the Hydra's heads heavily with a single slash. However, it didn't sever the head as the blonde had hoped. After all, that was the blonde's prey. He certainly didn't want anyone stealing his kill. Besides, the fame of slaying the Hydra was quite prestigious. The blonde captain was so flattered he became overconfident, thinking he was capable again. He immediately charged forward with his sword, ready to take it head down. Seeing the blonde captain repelled, Layla is speechless. The thief is also unbelievably powerful. She just think the blonde captain is most charming like this. After the masked man's previous attacks, Hydra's stamina is already low. As long as the thief can successfully attract Hydra's attention, blonde captain's attack will cause damage. The little mage's magic can also help to contain and disrupt. Layla is happy that they will succeed in defeating now, but it was only celebrating prematurely. The Hydra flung a stone, knocking down the little mage first. The little mage cried out in pain. Her whole body was filled with an aura of fear, and the beast could absorb human fear and turn it into power. However, misfortune never comes singly. A large amount of black gas suddenly erupted from the wetland. It's the source of its magic. Generally, it only appears in the deepest part of the labyrinth. The Hydra absorbed this gas and mutated. Not only were its injuries instantly healed, but its physical attributes were also significantly enhanced. The masked man suggested they retreat, but the blonde refused to give up. With great difficulty, he finally weakened his opponent's stamina. At least he wanted to cut off a head before returning to show off and pick up girls. But unexpectedly, his broken sword shattered at the slightest touch. Faced with the Hydra's counterattack, at the critical moment, the male lead repaid evil with kindness, appearing to save his life. Seeing the young mage unconscious, as a magic user, she has resistance to magic, so healing magic is generally ineffective. The male lead kept using the most basic healing spell without stopping. Layla didn't understand what he was trying to do. The scummy teammates casually explained, of course, he's stacking healing spells. Surprisingly, it actually worked on the little mage. Layla was utterly shocked by this. She was even called inexperienced for being surprised. The male lead had always healed them like this before. This time, Layla couldn't stay calm. Stacked healing? Not to mention seeing it, she's never even heard of it. The masked man suddenly announced that Hydra seems to have specifically requested a duel with the protagonist. Senna insisted on fighting together regardless of his objections. The protagonist knew she wouldn't listen even if he told her, but as soon as she sensed danger, she had to leave. You all stay here and don't wander off. At this point, the blonde captain chickened out and didn't dare to act tough anymore. He saw that the masked man could cut off a head with a single swing of his sword. The blonde captain didn't understand why his sword was unharmed. Little did he know that he was holding a demonic sword. Legend says it houses powerful forces. Meanwhile, Senna's attack on the Hydra was ineffective. She was then retaliated against and sent flying by the Hydra. Everyone realized that the Hydra had done it on purpose, only to use Senna as a hostage to force the male lead into a one-on-one fight. Because mutated monsters not only have enhanced combat abilities, but their intelligence is also improved. The male lead had no choice but to tell the masked man not to interfere, but he himself didn't last long before falling. However, this awakened the power dormant within him. When the protagonist regained consciousness, he saw that Senna was fine. The little mage was also out of life-threatening danger. Instead, he wondered what had just happened to him. The blonde excitedly praised the protagonist's strength. With the protagonist's help, he was confident they could conquer the maze. Shamelessly, he planned to split the money from selling the Hydra magic stone equally among the three of them. The two newcomers didn't contribute anything, so they wouldn't get a share this time. Sina is just the male lead sidekick, anyway. He can just appease her easily. But even so, what about the young mage? Sure enough, there's no lower limit for a villainous couple. The thief acts ordinary yet so confident. She even finds the young mage useless now. Besides, it's unknown whether she'll even wake up. The blonde intends to sell her while she's incapacitated. After all, the little mage is quite good looking. Some perverts just like this type. The blonde captain is angry. The guild forbids adventurers from fighting each other. He wants everyone to testify to get Senna expelled from the guild. But besides the thief, no one is willing to cooperate. That female thief is truly despicable. She even wants to falsely accuse them of being accomplices. But unexpectedly, the masked man turned the tables. He didn't see them beating someone, but he did see human trafficking. This villainous couple planned to sell the young mage while she was unconscious to a perverted nobleman. The masked man is actually Jik, a direct subordinate adventurer of the Royal Capital Adventurers Guild. He has the authority to revoke the licenses of other adventurers. The villainous couple were quickly subdued and taken away. Recently, the town's security has been deteriorating, and the cause is the adventurers. So he was sent to investigate, and he ran into this adulterous couple. After all, they were planning to traffic people. Not only would their adventurer status be revoked, but they would also be punished with hard labor until death. The male lead is also incredibly naive and forgiving. He hopes Jik will forgive them, because he thinks, at first, they probably wanted to strive to be excellent adventurers. Only later did they become obsessed with money and fame. So he hopes they can give them another chance. A single word, defying heaven. In the end, Jik just kicked them out of town. After all, even expulsion wouldn't necessarily reform them. Instead, continuing as adventurers under the guild's supervision might be better. The male lead continues to make outrageous remarks. Expelling the adulterous couple from the town made him feel great. Afterwards, Layla learned that Jik's real purpose was to monitor the Adventurers Guild branch here. The Royal Capital Guild suspected that strange occurrences in this town were likely caused by the branch manager's schemes. Therefore, he hoped Layla could assist him. Layla didn't refuse but had one condition. She wanted the young mage to join their team. She couldn't just leave the young mage alone. Jik agreed without hesitation. After all, having another companion wouldn't hurt him. It just meant he had more people to monitor. Ever since he saw the protagonist instantly kill the Hydra, he knew he couldn't leave the protagonist unchecked. The protagonist finally understood. What does it mean when, broken and defeated, you're surrounded by indifference and malice? But the moment you get back on your feet, kindness comes knocking? This morning, the male lead planned to head to the guild first. He still hadn't exchanged the Hydra magic stone he obtained from the kill for money. He could also help Senna with her request at the same time. Because for adventurers, besides dungeon crawling for gold, requests are also an important source of income. If Senna wants to be an adventurer in the future, she should also take on some quests to gain experience. Senna didn't expect the protagonist to be so considerate of her. She blushed like a bubble teapot out of shyness. But just as the two arrived at the guild, they saw all the adventurers staring intently at them. People around them started discussing the protagonist's defeat of the Hydra. The protagonist suddenly realized. He quietly reminded Senna to be careful. Word's gotten out about them defeating the Hydra, and many unscrupulous adventurers want to steal the magic stone. As soon as the words left his mouth, 4 adventurers appeared behind him. Their leader, Manuel, wanted to talk to the protagonist. Seeing the protagonist's guarded expression, Magnol assumed it was because there were too many people, making him uncomfortable. So he immediately told the others to leave. Then, Manuel suddenly started apologizing to the protagonist. It was all because of the blonde-haired guy. Everyone in town knew what he was like, but no one ever thought to lend a hand. They knew the protagonist was being bullied, but he always found excuses, everyone sweeping their own doorsteps, ignoring others' bleeding noses. They even kicked him when he was down, mocking him as a good-for-nothing. Manuel felt guilty for standing by and doing nothing. He definitely doesn't deserve the male lead's easy forgiveness. Senna bristled. Is that even a question? To gain the male lead's forgiveness, he should at least kneel before him for 2.5 days. After all, a mere apology is nothing compared to the pain the male lead has endured all these years. The male lead was dumbfounded. It sounds cool, but afterwards, everyone will surely see me as a villain. Besides, even if he defeats the Hydra, he's still just a useless healer who only knows healing magic. The male lead is truly overpowered. He doesn't mind everyone continuing to call him incompetent. Then, the guild girl's face flushed. After all, the magic stone of the high-difficulty monster, the Hydra, is right in front of her. And it's a magic stone that has been affected and mutated, causing the price to be at least 10 times higher than the original price or even higher. Just because the mutation of Warcraft is an extremely rare event. What's more, it's a powerful monster like Hydra. As we all know, monsters need to consume a lot of chakra to mutate. Except in the depths of the maze, it is difficult to meet the conditions outside. But Hydra mutated in the swamp. Although there have been incidents in the past where magic power condensed outside the maze, but they've never heard of a large quantity of food causing mutations. Combined with the appearance of half-beast humanoids on the upper levels, the protagonist suspects something might have changed deep within the maze. Little did he know, his words proved prophetic. Other adventurers have recently encountered similar anomalies, but the guild doesn't plan to investigate the cause. Hazem, who has been eyeing the protagonist, appears. If he has any problems, he can talk to him directly. Upon learning about the rampaging labyrinth monsters and the mutated Hydra, Hazem refuses to waste manpower dealing with such minor issues. The protagonist worries that if adventurers end up getting injured or killed, Hazem is just a jerk. He doesn't care about the lives of adventurers. The protagonist compromises, suggesting at least issuing a warning notice. But Hazem mocks him instead. If you're scared, then leave this town. Senna doesn't like that guy. He had that kind of attitude towards the male lead. Little did she know that Hazem is the acting branch president. They say the branch president is a doddering old fool. He's too old to do anything but sit in his office. Therefore, Hazem became the acting president. He's usually very strict with everyone, to the extent that even the guild's employees are afraid of him. The male protagonist, to help Senna gain experience, had his eye on a monster subjugation request. It was also a battle request that Senna liked, but the receptionist advised her against it. It said that a phoenix has recently been nesting near the teleportation array. The guild only offered a high reward because of it, although the profit is substantial. But relying only on a martial artist and a healer to challenge the phoenix is a total waste, no matter how you look at it. After all, the phoenix is a flying unit. Without ranged attacks, it's hard to deal with. Therefore, warriors and mages, and at least one healer who knows wide area healing, are indispensable. In an instant, they both silently thought of their choices. And so they found the young mage and his 2 companions. It just so happens that Jik also needs to monitor the male lead. It's more convenient if we team up. The little mage has no objections either. She's just worried whether the male lead is willing to team up with her. After all, she did something excessive to him before. The male lead forgave the little mage long ago. As long as she doesn't repeat the same mistakes, she's still a good girl. Thus, everyone split into 3 groups. Jik went to accept a mission, while Layla the little mage shopped for gear. The protagonist took Senna to the potion shop. Healing magic combined with potions could heal burns faster. But suddenly, someone hugged Senna from behind. Looking closely, it turned out to be a wealthy and generous red-haired girl. Senna was surprised to see Luma here. Luma claimed to be a top-tier grand mage of the continent, a renowned adventurer, and the flame god, who can instantly quiet a crying child, appearing in the labyrinth city. What's so strange about that? But Senna knew, it must be her father who sent her. After all, his beloved only daughter had run away from home like she was escaping. Worried, he asked Luma to check on her. Little did he know, the culprit who caused her to run away was the male lead. And the male lead called her master. It turns out the male lead had briefly trained with Luma before. Luma is also an old friend of Senna's father. Next, Luma wants to discuss some of Senna's family matters. The male lead is asked to step aside temporarily. Unexpectedly, the male lead refuses to leave at all. He insists because Senna is now his teammate and not an outsider. Moreover, Senna's father might even trouble Luma. He'll use every method to bring her home. Luma wondered, if that were the case, how the male lead could stop her. She was surprised that the male lead had indeed become stronger. So she agreed to let the male lead stay here. Senna explained it was all a misunderstanding. She didn't leave home without a word. Although she left in a hurry at the time and didn't explain properly to her parents. But she also left a message for her parents. She said she was going to her brother and not to worry. Her parents were baffled. The message was far too vague. No matter what, when parents see their vibrant young daughter calling an unrelated man brother, and telling them not to worry about it, it's impossible not to worry. In the end, why did she suddenly leave? Senna is shy all because of the protagonist, but she doesn't dare to reveal the exact reason. Ever since the protagonist saved her, she has been secretly sending people to keep an eye on him. Upon learning that he was expelled from the team by the blonde guy, Senna thought she couldn't miss this opportunity, so she immediately left home to find him and asked to team up. The protagonist suggested that it would be best for her to clarify things with her family first. To become an adventurer, you need parental consent. Senna feels wronged. Does he really not care about her? Little did she know, her father never opposed it. He was just worried about her well-being since she left so abruptly. After Luma found an excuse to send the protagonist away, she teased her. Senna was willing to leave her family to stay by his side. But he acts as if he doesn't need her help at all. Senna must be feeling very uneasy. But Senna thought it was because the protagonist was very capable. Not only does he have extensive adventurer experience, he's always considerate of others. He prioritizes others over himself. Even today, he went out of his way to negotiate a commission for her. Surely, he wanted her to team up with warriors or mages more often to gain more experience. This way, if the male lead is gone someday, she won't be trapped by life. Senna felt wronged. She clearly came to save the male lead, but now she keeps receiving help instead. She's even become a burden to the male lead. Luma comforted her, saying that because of her presence, the male lead has actually changed a lot. In the past, the male lead would never have stood up to himself or someone else. So it's all thanks to Senna. After Senna and the male lead left, Luma finally decided to attend to her real business. Her true purpose was to investigate the guild's vice president, secretly finding out what schemes he was plotting. The man never imagined the rare monster mutation he'd encountered would appear again in just 2.5 days. The mutated phoenix was diving straight at him. The young mage was so scared he couldn't move. Just now, when they teleported into the maze, Senna unexpectedly thought they'd see the phoenix immediately upon arrival. Little did they know, the space was too narrow for the phoenix to enter. Soon, they arrived at a spacious area ahead. Unsurprisingly, the phoenix was there. It is said that there's a shortcut to the depths of the maze here. Because of the phoenix, no one can pass through alive. The unknown space signifies untouched treasures and items within. That's why the guild has issued a bounty to find someone to subdue it. The protagonist notices signs of high-temperature burns nearby. He concludes that the phoenix's nest must be nearby. As a magical beast with a strong sense of territory, they don't need to actively seek it out. Once it detects intruders, the phoenix will come to them on its own. Meanwhile, the flame god, Luma, appeared at the guild. The receptionist's eyes are the measure. Immediately go up and greet her enthusiastically. After all, without adventurers, there's no adventurers guild. She only gives her good graces to those powerful bigwigs. Although Luma seems unable to afford the fabric, the remaining fabric is quite high grade. Her accessories look unremarkable. In fact, each one was an expensive magical item. So the receptionist assumed she might be a top-tier adventurer. But unexpectedly, Luma immediately demanded to see the branch guild master. The receptionist was stunned. They thought, if she wants to kill the branch master, how could we possibly let her meet him? Luma, feeling helpless, realized that reasoning wouldn't work. So she had no choice but to use brute force. Seeing that she was serious, the receptionist immediately bolted. After all, a job that only pays 3,000 a month isn't worth killing yourself over. Until Hazem, the branch president's representative, appeared to stop it. You can talk to him directly if you need anything. Only because he recognized the redhead before him as Shank, the flame god, Luma. Once she shows her true abilities, this place will turn to ashes. On the other hand, the phoenix keeps circling in the sky and won't come down. Neither the male protagonists nor Senna's attacks can hit it. At this moment, they regretted not buying a bow earlier. However, due to the distance, attacking was impossible. Senna assumed both sides had the same limitations, but unexpectedly, the phoenix fired fireballs, slapping them in the face. Because besides using its claws and beak, or ramming its flame-covered body into opponents, its most troublesome move is the fireball attack. Hazem didn't expect Luma to be just like the male protagonist. It is also to inform the maze that there may be changes, but his answer didn't change. If you're scared, then leave this town. But Luma is different from the male protagonist, because she hasn't been here for a long time, but she found that the town is now full of gangsters. She had reason to suspect that it was the work of the guild. Even if Hazem doesn't admit it, it doesn't matter. And then there are those mysterious white towers all over town. Hazem also feigned ignorance, claiming to know nothing. That's interesting, because for Labyrinth City, the Adventurers Guild is an organization with absolute power. Once you become a branch president, you're practically the king of this town. But him claiming to know nothing about the town's strange changes is absurd. Seeing Hazem still stubbornly insisting he's just a lackey, Luma snapped, "Stop pretending." Hazem was indifferent, saying, "If you're scared, then leave." However, this was exactly what the guild had planned. They deliberately brought in a large number of scummy adventurers and even drove out normal adventurers. She speculated that something big was about to happen, requiring a lot of sacrifices, preferably people whose disappearance would go unnoticed. And the only thing she could think of was a maze breakout. Meanwhile, several people in the maze were at a loss, watching the phoenix rampaging in the air. If this continues, the surroundings will become a sea of fire. Not only is the high temperature unbearable, but oxygen will also be consumed massively. Before long, they will be forced to leave. The male protagonist realized this. The phoenix intentionally wanted to drive them out of its territory. After all, they have more people. The phoenix probably thinks that if it rashly starts a fight, it won't be able to escape unscathed. Therefore, everyone can only forcefully engage in a group battle. Only the little mage's magic can attack from a distance. She needs to use water magic to attack the phoenix's wings. As long as she can extinguish the flames on its wings, she can make the phoenix descend. Then Zeke would use the magic sword to kill it. He knew that the magic needed to inflict damage on the phoenix required time. So during the casting, the young mage would be defenseless. But she is not afraid. Jik guaranteed the phoenix wouldn't attack her. After all, the phoenix didn't have hands. So the three outputs acted as bait to attract hatred, creating casting time for the young mage. With Jik successfully striking the phoenix and causing damage, it's only a matter of time before it's completely killed. Meanwhile, within the guild, Hazem denies Luma's speculation. But if we consider the various strange occurrences in the town recently as a precursor to a rampage, it makes sense. The most concerning thing is the monster mutations. Even if he really is a stubborn fool, there's no way he wouldn't notice how much magical energy has filled the town and the area around the labyrinth. As a result, the injured phoenix unexpectedly mutated. No one saw that coming. Encounters with rare mutated monsters twice in a row shocked everyone. The young mage was falling apart. Why is it always her? She was terrified this might lead to her death. But letting the young mage stay in fear, it would be like Hydra making the phoenix even stronger. If she can't overcome her fear, she'll never grow. Seeing the phoenix identify her as the greatest threat, the young mage was paralyzed by fear. At the critical moment, Jik stepped forward. He had promised to stop the phoenix from attacking her, and he kept his word. This finally gave the young mage the courage she needed, but she needed everyone to buy her some time to cast her spell. At this point, Luma had already left the guild. But Hazem, that stubborn fool, still refused to tell the truth. Though she never expected these people to be honest anyway, Luma went to the White Tower to verify and confirm. This was definitely no ordinary object. Meanwhile, Senna landed a punch on the phoenix's body, but unexpectedly, the phoenix remained unscathed. Instead, her hand was almost burned off. The phoenix dove down once again. The male lead stepped forward to shield her from the attack, but his weapon melted in the intense heat. At this moment, the young mage finally completed her spell. She went a step further to create a massive ice arrow. Unfortunately, the phoenix had not descended low enough. Jik's magic sword still couldn't land a hit. Once again, Senna stepped forward with her nimble movements. He went straight to the phoenix's head. The phoenix fell. Everyone praised the young mage as the greatest contributor to the battle. It's a pity that the protagonist didn't use that mysterious power this time. Therefore, observation of the protagonist cannot end yet. Afterwards, the protagonist found Luma waiting for him at the inn. He also learned that the protagonist had gone to hunt down the phoenix. It was because she simply bribed the receptionist with a small amount of money, and the receptionist spilled everything. Just looking at their expressions, you can tell the expedition was a success. Not only can they exchange magic stones for money, but they also earned a bounty. Treating her to a meal is the least they could do. Then, Luma suddenly revealed Senna's true background to everyone. It turns out she is the daughter of Count Anarastoria. Everyone was shocked to hear this, and the protagonist recalled a little girl he saved years ago who seemed to be from a noble family. He finally realized that Senna was that golden-haired girl all along. Wow, this is going to be a massacre. The male lead never expected that blonde Sienna would turn blue overnight. However, an ancient legend has been passed down in this world. To defeat the evil dragon that awakens every 200 years, a hero will step forward and fight the dragon. However, facing the powerful evil dragon, the hero fought desperately but was ultimately defeated. At this moment, a mysterious girl suddenly appears. She possesses a mystical power capable of suppressing the evil dragon. Unfortunately, suppressing the evil dragon requires the girl to sacrifice her life. But she believes the hero will rise again. So she resolutely chooses to sacrifice herself, bringing temporary peace to the world. Meanwhile, Senna is complaining to the greedy receptionist about the mutated undead phoenix's magic core everyone fought together to obtain. It only exchanges for such a small amount of money. Little do they know, essence comes in concentration. That's because if they paid in silver and copper coins, the two of them wouldn't be able to carry it all. So she spent a lot of time exchanging for gold coins. Hurry up and put the money away. Senna, who made a rare big profit, had an idea. She hopes to move out of the inn and live together with the protagonist. After all, the money-minded receptionist said before that renting a detached house is more economical. Not to mention their current financial capacity, they could even afford to buy a wedding house. But having said that, the male lead still thought that Senna had objections to the hotel. However, she didn't have any objections at all. It was precisely because the hotel was too good. Because there are too many people and it's always noisy. She'd prefer a quieter place to have a heart-to-heart with the male lead. In a quiet and warm room. As a newbie, she could discuss her worries with the male lead. He would gently answer her questions. Then, once the atmosphere is set, both would gradually develop uncontrollable, passionate feelings. But unexpectedly, the male lead felt it was too soon. It's best to save up a lot of money for emergencies. Besides, there's Jik and the others. We originally asked them for temporary support to defeat the Phoenix. Afterwards, Jik wants to form a formal team. If he agrees, it won't just be their problem anymore. Senna wonders if the male lead will agree. In terms of fighting ability, he'd completely welcome it. Especially Jik's strength is absolutely unquestionable. If they want to continue delving deeper into the labyrinth in the future, they should be a pretty good team. Senna reluctantly agrees with the protagonist's decisions no matter what. After a brief celebration between both sides, the girls head back to their rooms to rest. Layla reminds Jik that, for the sake of the future, he needs to build a good relationship with the protagonist. Senna, meanwhile, wants to consult Layla about something. She confessed her desire to live with the male lead, but was rejected. Is he disliked? However, from Layla's perspective, the male lead clearly cherishes her. As for why he refused, saying he's shy seems a bit of an overstatement. Perhaps he just wants to take things slowly. After all, even men have different personalities. Senna looked up to her with admiration. Truly, Layla is amazing. She's clearly an experienced player in the game of love. After all, she always exudes the charm of a mature woman. She must know many positions Senna doesn't. However, Layla also wishes she were a master of her domain. Otherwise, she wouldn't be struggling so much now. Little does she know, the male lead has the same trouble. Jik thinks even if he agrees, it's no big deal. It's just that live under the same roof. Besides, being rejected by the male protagonist whom she admired so much makes Senna look pathetic. Could it be that he hates Senna? Of course he doesn't hate it at all. After all, when he despaired of the future, it was Senna who gave him the courage to continue being an adventurer. When the blonde captain kicked him out of the team again, it was also Senna who asked him to team up. And how could he possibly dislike her? However, Jik didn't know that he was also being criticized by Layla with the same words. She and Jik had known each other for a long time. Back then, they belonged to the same small team. As everyone knows, she's very pretty. Her admirers could circle the royal capital 2.5 times. Many people joined the team just to get close to her. Unexpectedly, even the young mage was intrigued by the gossip among women. Back to the point. Once, while Layla was alone, a mediocre adventurer tried to force himself on her. Fortunately, he didn't succeed. Layla initially planned to let it go, but Jik couldn't tolerate such a lecher. So after kicking the other person out of the team, he disappeared on his own, simply because he didn't know how to face Layla. Unexpectedly, they reunited here again. Faced with his request, Layla was still willing to help and forgave him for his previous interference. But little did he know, Layla wasn't angry at all. Yet he disappeared again because of this. Layla is upset that the blockhead doesn't understand women. The young boss lady bluntly points out that it's because she likes him. Jik is curious, if the male lead likes Senna, why did he reject her cohabitation invitation? The male lead admits he was indeed happy when he heard it, but he needed to confirm something first. Just as he finishes speaking, the money-obsessed receptionist appears. The results of the investigation report he commissioned are in. Senna is indeed the only daughter of the Earl of Anarestria. Normally, Senna and her spouse would inherit the title, but she suddenly said she wanted to be an adventurer. Jik thought it was normal. It's not unheard of for nobles to become adventurers. But the Earl and Countess couldn't possibly agree. After all, she's their most precious only daughter. However, an incident soon changed the Earl and Countess's minds. The girls only then learned that Senna's blue hair wasn't natural. As a child, she had blonde hair like her parents. Not long after being saved by the male lead, her hair turned blue overnight. Everyone was baffled and had never heard of such a thing. That's why the male lead didn't recognize her at first. Senna was the little girl he had saved. Afterward, the Count, after much investigation, still couldn't determine the reason for the hair color change. But since that day, the Count and Countess no longer opposed Senna becoming an adventurer. Jik suddenly understood. So that's what the male lead was worried about. But now there's nothing to worry about. The girls admired Senna, a noble young lady, but she could give up wealth and status for someone she likes, even chasing after him. Unexpectedly positive, so under the guidance of the little sisters, Layla wanted to have a private chat with Jik, playing hard to get. She hoped to become Jik's partner. Jik was dumbfounded. Aren't we already teammates? Little did he know, she meant a life partner. Jik shyly said he needed to think about it. Layla instantly lost her temper. But on second thought, her reaction was actually pretty good. After all, she probably had never considered this kind of thing before. The protagonist saw this and hoped to talk to Senna alone tomorrow. Senna thought something big was about to happen and readily agreed. Little did the protagonist know, when he finally worked up the courage to confess, he was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a bruised young man. Fortunately, the boy was fine after treatment. It turns out that the boy is also a maze orphan, so he was often taken care of by the landlady. However, maze orphans often dream of becoming adventurers. A while ago, he came to announce that he had joined a certain team. The hero knew what was going on as soon as he heard it, so he can only temporarily suspend his confession to Senna. He needs to go to the Adventurers Guild. As the protagonist expected, the boy, like him, encountered a pack of beast men in the labyrinth. It was at this moment that the others revealed their true nature. They deliberately pushed the boy forward to draw attention while seizing the opportunity to escape. However, these scum adventurers were soon captured with the protagonist's help. Yet, the protagonist had no intention of punishing them. They just wanted to drive them out of this town. The money-minded receptionist felt helpless. Solving the problem bypassing the guild was against the rules. However, the adventurers were also dissatisfied. It was the guild's intentional neglect that caused such incidents to keep happening. The receptionist had no rebuttal. After all, she could only follow orders from above. The protagonist was furious upon hearing this. He can't understand what the higher-ups in this guild are thinking. At this moment, Hazem appears and instead questions the protagonist about his intentions. Then, he turns the tables and throws baseless accusations. He accuses the protagonist of taking private action against the adventurers. The protagonist is truly fed up with this guy's mastery of manipulative rhetoric. He reported it to the guild, but they did nothing. If the guild won't take action, he'll handle it myself. But after handling it, the guild then demands a report. It's absurd that they ended up being the ones who most deserve to be driven out of town. The normal adventurers were infuriated. They wanted to beat the crap out of that useless Hazem. The captain calmed everyone down. Even if they beat him so badly his parents wouldn't recognize him, it wouldn't solve the problem. Therefore, the protagonist decided to personally negotiate with Hazem. The protagonist was dissatisfied with using orphaned maze survivors as scapegoats. Guilds in other towns wouldn't stand by. At least they would take corresponding measures. But this town chose to turn a blind eye, simply because they believed even if they acted, it wouldn't yield results. So they were unwilling to invest significant manpower or resources. Some even thought those maze orphans deserved their fate. If they didn't like this town, they could just leave. No one forced them to become adventurers. On the contrary, what the protagonist should do is not to drive others away, but to leave this place himself. He sees the protagonist still has something to say. Hazem preemptively guesses that he wants to talk about redemption, and mentions that someone once said, "There's only a thin line between adventurers and danger. Those who are incompetent deserve to die, and the incapable have no right to survive." With that, Hazem reveals the scars on his arm. The protagonist finally recognizes who he really is. Back before Hazem changed his name, the protagonist and he worked as grunt laborers in an adventurer squad. During that time, Hazem endured a lot of mockery and insults. Faced with the protagonist's kindness, Hazem's pride made him refuse to accept anyone's pity. In the middle of the night, the protagonist woke up Hazem, who was dozing off while on watch. It turned out they were already surrounded by goblins, and countless goblins, too many to count. However, these adventurers were all cowards. Seeing they couldn't win, they resorted to their final tactic. They threw the male lead and Hazem out as bait. In the blink of an eye, they had already made their escape. Practice makes perfect. The male lead had become accustomed to his current predicament. He also knew that those people probably intended this from the very beginning. That's why they hire incompetents like them. But neither of them gave up the idea of survival. After fighting, they managed to hide in a tree hole. The goblins are all so deaf and blind that they just didn't notice. Hazem laughed at himself that they were all trash. If the adventurers can escape alive, they are also a successful bait. However, the male protagonist feels that none of those people can escape. Only a very few people know that when goblins hunt in groups, they actually tend to target larger groups. As long as they manage to remain undetected, once those people are found by the goblins, they will be safe. Just as this was said, the goblins outside collectively mobilized to chase the fleeing adventurers, ironically becoming bait that helped the two escape. Only then did the male lead realize that Hazem had suffered a large wound on his arm during the fight. Seeing this, the male lead forgot about escaping and prioritized treating Hazem's wound. Hazem didn't want to involve the male lead, saying a useless fellow like him deserved to die. He had long since accepted his fate. He explained that the reason for his certainty was because he had also been redeemed once. Later, the two successfully escaped. The protagonist became Hazem's redemption. In contrast, the fleeing adventurers all died at the hands of the goblins. They didn't expect even the female adventurers to be killed outright. Later, Hazem unexpectedly received help from a benefactor. Unknowingly, he rose to his current position. And the benefactor he speaks of is Mr., the current branch president. To repay the protagonist for saving his life, Hazem urges the protagonist to leave town as soon as possible. Even taking Senna with him is fine. Afterwards, the protagonist didn't reveal Hazem's advice, but was pulled away by the money-grubbing receptionist for a private conversation. Many guild employees opposed Mr. and Hazem's actions. Because Mr. was recently appointed as a new executive, his ideas conflict with many veteran employees. Therefore, the front desk hoped to ask for their help. Recently, many monsters have suddenly appeared in town. If left unchecked, ordinary people might get hurt. Thus, they hope for their assistance, though Senna is confused. In such cases, the guild would usually issue a bounty. However, the bounty must also be approved by Hazem. But they deliberately turn a blind eye, so it definitely won't pass. Therefore, the front desk secretly spreads information about problematic, scummy adventurers. They can help eliminate them. The front desk also pretends to be unaware. As for the abnormalities in the maze, after all, Mist has spies in the guild. The front desk can't make it too obvious. They can only find opportunities to subtly warn others. The rest depends on the adventurer's own vigilance. As compensation, the magic stones obtained from subjugating beasts can be sold to the front desk at a higher price. Not long after, Mist received a letter from the Chancellor requesting Mist to closely monitor Senna. Hazem couldn't understand, why would the so-called Sleeping Beauty legend be significant enough to warrant the constant attention of a nation's Chancellor? Little did they know, Sleeping Beauty had sacrificed herself. The legend of bringing peace to the world is not a fairy tale. That blue hair of Senna is proof of the Chosen One. It is also the only absolute existence capable of suppressing the evil dragon.